Hello, everybody on Reddit. This is Arlen. So I wanted to record this video. No, it's not a video. It's just audio. But I wanted to record this because everyone keeps saying I don't listen to criticism. But I do listen to criticism. And I listen to criticism by looking at the reviews that people didn't like for book one, I read the reviews that are negative and I see what they didn't like, and then I put that into the next book so that the next book doesn't make those same mistakes. Now, I can't go back and change the first book because I've already rewritten the book 3 times. I hired an editor to work on it, and after she did her changes to the book, I didn't touch it. I changed nothing, as far as I remember. And if I did change anything, it would have been a few sentences. So that's why I don't go back and rewrite the first book, because back then, maybe it's different now, but back then I didn't trust myself enough to do a better job than she did, because she was the editor. So I'm not going to be rewriting book one to fix the things people don't like about it, at least not right now. Maybe in, 5 or 10 years when the whole series is finished, possibly. That would be crazy. I don't think any writer's ever done that before, but anyway, so here's me going over one of the reviews. Okay, now this is a review that I've listened to a lot. It's one of the very first reviews I ever got. It's a 4-star review. So it's from Dylan Graves, and he gives it 4 out of 5 stars and says, a decent self-published debut with many flaws. Verified purchase. Just want to add. So he says, I'll start by saying I think I'm being quite generous by giving this book 4 stars. I do so because I believe it should be compared to other self-published debut fantasy books, the kind which appear by the hundreds in every library in search, rather than against the best books of the fantasy genre. Compared to even other books containing Crystal Keepers in its title, this is a good book, and I am glad I read it, in large part on a whim. So, I just want to start with that. He says this is a good book, and I'm glad I read it. So that means it's not a 1-star book like everyone keeps saying. There may be, flaws, but it's not this horrible thing. So he says, for a debut self-published fantasy, I've read much, much worse, and I'm glad that the author put in the time to properly edit and refine his story. So, and my cat just closed it out. Okay, so he says, for a debut self-published fantasy, I've read much, much worse, and I'm glad that the author put in the time to properly edit and refine his story. Unfortunately, however, I just don't think the story is very good, which is strange because he just said it was a good book in the last paragraph, but anyways. And it does pain me to say that about a first novel in a genre I love. Enough vagueness, though, let's dive in. The novel starts in an interesting place, Talmoria, at an interesting time when hundreds of magical meteors fall from the sky, causing destruction but leaving in their wake powerful crystals that grant some people fantastic abilities. It's not the most original premise, but I'll take it. And it would be interesting watching how this upsets the balance of society and cut 1,000 years into the future. So obviously he doesn't like the cut. I would just say that part of the story that happens in history is pretty intense. It's like a huge war, and I probably didn't have the skill back then to write it even if I planned to, but that would be a book all on its own, and that wasn't the story I was trying to tell. It's just important for people to know where the crystals came from, so that's why the book starts like that, with the farmers and seeing the rain of crystals and all that, but the cut happens right after that. So we go on in his review. He says, The novel starts in earnest with Princess Mani, who has spent much of her life trapped in a tower with her torch wings. Read fairies, because yes, they're very similar to fairies, but they've got their own unique twist. Um, she has a blue crystal, Mikhail's crystal, which is one of its kind and might be the thing which can stop the mysterious plague known as the Grey Death. After her sister climbs her tower and tries to take the crystal, Mani ends up accidentally killing her and, due to knowledge learned, escapes the tower. Well, that is an interesting take on the princess in the tower trope. I'm excited to see Mani dies, cut 70 years into the future. So that's not really that accurate. The story goes on for quite a bit after that before another cut happens. But this is just, it was just a stylistic thing I chose to have these fast kind of beginning action scenes to kick off the story that could stand on their own as self-contained little stories. And because that's not the real story. It's just that instead of have a chapter that's all exposition and me just explaining these things to the audience in like a prologue, I instead chose to give us a glimpse into those pieces of the story through, the classic show don't tell. I showed you guys those parts of the story instead of just told you about them. Now, if you don't like the cuts, that's fine. I get it. The book actually originally started with Sean, and these cuts weren't in there. And then I added them in because it just felt like the whole Sean finding the crystal and going to the magic world, it felt too similar. Like, yeah, we've seen Narnia, we've seen Harry Potter, like there's been lots of books that have done this same portal thing, but there's not very many that really like start in the world first, so we see the perspective of the characters that we meet later first, which does kind of mess up the fish out of water feel for Sean, but it was just a choice I made, that's all. It's not like I did it because I'm bad writer, and I don't know what I'm doing. I just thought it would be an interesting way to start the story. Kind of like Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, the movie, starts with a flashback of Smeagol finding the ring. It's interesting. And I thought, that'd be a cool way to start my book too. We do a flashback to the crystals. So, I'm going to go on with this review. Sean lives in our world, and one day while exploring some abandoned mines, or at least near some abandoned mines, finds a strange blue crystal still clutched by a skeletal hand. He takes the crystal, which revives Mani, who before long takes Sean through a strange portal back to Talmoria. Due to the plague and the actions of Mani's kingly father, the world is a darker place, though still filled with enough magic to fill Sean with awe. In order to save the Torchwings and possibly the world, the two teenagers must use the crystal to... stop. Again, you get the picture. I'm not too fond of stories with too many introductions and false starts, and this story has probably 5 or 6 before we finally get into the meat of the story. That is perhaps its biggest flaw. Now, I would agree with that. And he goes on to say the structure is incredibly repetitive, especially in the beginning, and each beginning restarts any momentum the story had before each time. And personally, I think each time the story reveals a new starting point, it gets worse. Or maybe that's just my disdain for portal fantasy, especially which is so derivative of the very overused Isekai formula. So, his opinion that the structure is repetitive, I agree with. When I think back to it, I wouldn't say there's 5 or 6 false starts, but there is quite a few before the story finds its direction, and that really just comes from having to introduce this new world, bring together Sean and Mani so that the real story can begin. There's a lot of different things that need to happen before like the main quest can get revealed. Like, compare it to when Frodo gets to Rivendell with the ring. That's really when the quest starts, at least in the movies. I know it's different in the books. In the movies, that's when the quest starts. And up until that point, it's just sort of like a mini quest. He's just trying to get the ring to Rivendell to the elves, and I always like that. You know, it's like that actually to me that's my favorite section of the movie is up until they get to Rivendell, and I love the rest of the movie, but just that first beginning section allows the story to have a different sort of formula where it's more intimately focused between the hobbits and Aragorn leading them and them trying to escape the Nazgul, and it's just more simplistic. It's rooted more in its genre of like the horror elements of the Nazgul and the adventure seeking of them setting off on the road, and you know it just has a more of a self-contained feel, and that's how mine comes across too, you know. But there is, you know, there's quite a few false starts. The first false start is the crystals and the farmers. Then we jump ahead to Maney and Daniel and the Torchwings, and then she dies, and we come back to Sean, and then Sean and Maney return to sort of finish off the end of her story. And after that, they start what is the Rivendell journey, essentially, where they want to get Fitzel to the Torchwing Forest so that she can be healed by the Queen. And they get in little stuff along the way, like with Duncan, who's looking for her, and the Agents of Cinder, and so it allows there to be more of like a self-contained story there, and you know, like that's fine. I get why people don't like that. You know, it's like too many little short stories before we get to the main big story, and then by the time we get to the big story, there's not really a whole lot left of the book. It's, you know, once we hit Millie and we move on to the Agatha's cabin, you know, I felt like I wanted to just hurry up and get through all that because the book was already pretty long as it was, you know, and I cut down a lot of the stuff of Maney and Sean training at Agatha's cabin. I cut out a scene where Maney gets the grizzly wolf tail. There used to be a scene I cut with a troll, or a giant. I mean, he wasn't a troll, he's a giant, and they have to snap off his toenail. It was a really fun scene to write, but I had to cut that too. I cut a bunch of stuff before my editor ever got a hold of it. But anyway, so that's something I won't repeat in book two. Book two is only gonna have one false start, I promise. And then after that, straight to the meat. You know, we just have one quick flashback scene at the beginning and then straight to the meat of the story. Because I know that this person, and I know a lot of people have said this, that they don't like all the cuts. So, no more cuts in book two. So yeah, we're gonna go on. I'm gonna just kind of skim through this and react. Okay, so he says it doesn't help that Sean and to a lesser extent Maney are very boring protagonists. I couldn't bring myself to care for Sean at all in the entire narrative. He has no character, makes stupid decisions, seems intent on making things difficult, and his dialogue is very cringy. He is, in short, an obnoxiously accurate 15-year-old with nothing interesting to make the character worth reading. Now, I'll admit, Sean's like not my best character. I always used to joke around when reading it to people that how bad of a character he is. I even used to joke about that, you know? But, so I know Sean's boring. He's fucking boring. And I don't know. It just was like hard to write his perspective sometimes because, you know, for someone like him, it would be so hard for him to like believe anything he's seeing. He would just be in a state of awe all the time if I wrote him accurately. He would just be like, oh my gosh, look at this, look at that. What a crystal, torch wings, like magic forest. You know, like if I was to actually make him feel like totally real, like a real person would if they found themselves in Talmoria, he'd be just like a dude on an acid trip, you know? He would just be going crazy. So I had to make him like more just like blasé, like he's just rolling with it, you know? Like, oh, this world's crazy. Okay, we're just gonna have to accept that and get on with the day. But so yeah, his dialogue's cringy. You know, he's yeah, like you know, he's not my best character. I agree. Like now that I've finished the book and I'm on to my second book and I've written a couple short stories, like I know how to write characters a little better. And I think book 2 has better characters overall. Like all my characters in book 2 are better, including Sean. Sean is much better in book 2. And you know, it's just book 1, it just didn't come out right, you know. But I don't even fully agree with that. There's things about Sean I like the scene where he returns home to see his mother is a great scene. The scene where he chooses to return to Talmoria, you know, after his mother is great. His interactions with Orion I really have always liked. And the battle with Duncan in the South after he's held prisoner, that is a great scene in the book. I don't care what anyone says. I've never heard anyone criticize those parts of the book, so people must at least agree with me there that the Duncan fight and the final battle are two of the best parts of the book because I've literally never heard anyone criticize them. That or all these supposed critics never even make it that far before they put in their final opinion. But because the way I write is I slowly build up, you know, my everything is leading to the ending. That's the way I write. So it may be boring at first, but every step of that journey is increasing the intensity of the ending. That's just the way I do things. But so yeah, he says he can't get over for Sean how little he seems to care about being away from his family, friends, and world. That's not true, actually. Like, this is one thing I will disagree on. There's a bunch of parts in the book where Sean talks about wanting to go home and missing his family and what do his friends think and how crazy the new world is. Like, that, I don't know, maybe he just didn't read those parts. But, anyways, yeah. Maney fares better, being a take on the classic Tower Princess archetype. She is strong-headed, somewhat cruel, and determined. She still falls victim to making stupid decisions and hiding information for the sole purpose of allowing later plot beats to happen, but she works better. I don't get what he means by that. Hiding what information, other than maybe who her sister is. But that's, like, obvious why you would do that when you're on the run and you murdered that person. Anyways. He likes Maney. He don't like Sean. But who they are doesn't matter. It means nothing to the story. Yeah, he says Maney makes one choice towards the beginning of the novel, and after that, the protagonists are basically forced along a path and make no interesting choices again. Not true. Maney does many things on her own. Sean's more the one that doesn't do anything. Maney first decides to kill her sister, stop the thievery of the crystal. Then she destroys the Torchwing prison. Then she escapes to the north and, goes through the portal. And then with Sean, when they get back, she makes the decision to go take Fitzel to Millie to save her. And what else? She decides to stay for Sean. She didn't have to do that. But then when they go to get the red crystal, the idea was for Sean to grab it so that he would bond with it, and then Agatha could have control of Sean. It's just like Maney does make quite a few decisions. And then the big ending that she does, that's a big decision, I'd say. Sean's more the one that doesn't make much decisions, so I don't really agree with that part, but yeah, in book 2, I make sure, because that's one thing I definitely take on board, is that while I will defend the book and say that there is more choices made than I'm being given credit for, there's probably not enough So in book two, I made sure that the characters are having a much more central role to the decision making and things like that. Sometimes it feels unrealistic for Sean and Maney age characters to be making these decisions, so that's why they don't happen sometimes. But anyways, on that note, I'll take a break from the negativity to speak positively. I did enjoy the work after all, and that hinges on two elements, the plot and the prose. The plot is intricate, interesting, and complex, and the various world building elements connect well to make the plot work and integrate naturally into the conflicts. Note now that the world building is not always a plus, but we are being positive for now. The plot is great, and some of the twists and beats are actually very well executed. Even though the main characters are herded through it, they are going on one hell of a ride, and the stakes are believably high. Like, yeah, obviously I agree with that one. Um, but that's really, I feel that way. That reflects what I feel when I read the book, you know? Like, I agree with other things he's saying, but I also, like his criticisms, but I also agree with this, that I feel when I read the book that this journey that they go on and this plot with a lot of the twists and turns and surprise things that happens is it's very enjoyable. And I'll compare it to another book that I loved growing up, Fablehaven. It was one of my favorite books. I don't enjoy it quite as much now as an adult, but when I was a kid I loved it. And like, I still think it's a really good story, you know? It's like not quite as good as like maybe Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or something, you know, but it's one of the better ones out there. And I definitely feel, you know, on you know, like an outside view, you know, a perspective that's not biased, that my book is probably better than Fablehaven. And that book has a lot of five-star reviews, so it ain't fair that I'm getting so shafted here. But, and yeah, so it'd be cool if maybe some of you people listening will give the book a chance so you could enjoy this freaking cool plot I came up with. But anyways, as well, the author clearly has a gift for prose. I don't think it's perfect. There are some laughable metaphors and imagery sprinkled throughout, but I do think it's vastly more interesting to read J.M. Arlen's prose than it is to read generic dry fantasy with no flair. I'd rather someone take risks with weird descriptions, as Arlen does, rather than describe everything objectively and boringly. In fact, I want J.M. Arlen, should he publish another book, to lean into this even harder. It was a real joy and part of what carried me through the whole book. Now that's something that will probably be more done on the final pass of the book, because those metaphors and stuff and imagery that I sprinkle throughout, it usually is sort of just like spice that I added to the story at the end, you know, because I feel this feeling when I read things sometimes, these long sections of books where there's no descriptions and you're just reading walls of text, and maybe there's been a description, you know, before or something that describes like the room they're in, but you know, once in a while you got to give them a little taste of it again to remind them what it's like in there. Like say, oh, the fire was flickering behind their head, casting a dark silhouette, you know, around their ears or something, like making their ears glow red. Like you just give them a little bit of feeling in there, just some spice, you know, and that's kind of like that, you know. Right now, book two is more dry. I feel like the prose is more dry right now because I'm just sort of focused on getting the story in there. But the final pass, I'm definitely going to keep this in mind, that he really liked my prose, which is kind of surprising to me because it's definitely not something I ever focused on. I never thought my prose was going to be something anyone said was special. I always knew that the plot was going to be my biggest strength, and I was right, I think. Maybe my prose is my second biggest strength, but now he says, what didn't carry me through the whole book, though, was the world. I hate to say this because there is a lot of crafting and heart that has gone into the creation of Talmoria, but it feels like a world of plot convenience. And frankly, a world that could have used a lot more research. Let me explain. Everything in Talmoria seems like it is within a few days of anything else. Okay, yeah, everything's a little close. I agree. 100%. That's a flaw. No doubt. I messed up there. If I ever rewrite the book, that's going to have to play into the rewrite is the distance between like Farangel and Millie's Forest. They're like way too close and it's like it just doesn't give it that epic grand feel that it should, you know? So anyways, uh it feels very cluttered. Yeah, it's pretty much what I just said. It's too close. What I can't forgive is that the author seems not to realize how long the time skills he's working on are. Manny leaves Telmoria, dies, and then comes back 70 years later. Yet pretty much everyone knows what she looks like, knows who she is, talks about her constantly, can recite her exact crimes by heart, and is on the constant lookout for her. I can't talk about how mind-boggling that is, you know? Yeah. So, uh, I mean, I get it, but like the story of Mamie and Veronica and how she escaped and the Great Death and everything that happened. It's like the one of the biggest turning points in Talmorian history, you know, since the Reign of Crystals. So people do know Mamie because she's like a folk hero or like a legend or something. You know, she defied the king and or well disappeared. You know, she defied the king and vanished. So it's a pretty crazy story. And there was wanted posters of her everywhere. So there's likely dozens, you know, like thousands of people across Talmoria who have these posters, like collector's items, from when the king got shafted by his daughter. You know, don't quote me on that one there. Um, so I don't really think that's a good one. And most people don't know who she is really. It's just like a few special people that should know who she is, like the leader of the king's army, Duncan. He knows who Manny is because you know he's a plant creature. He's like almost like AI, or it is almost like AI. It doesn't have a gender. It's no gender, Duncan. It is just like a thinking plant creature, and so he knows, or it knows. Um, uh, he thinks things should have changed more in 70 years, like the buildings and stuff. Like, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, with the way that this world is, how it's slowly being destroyed by a disease, and there's a magical wall dividing two parts of the island, and it's like Farangel, for example, is a tiny little like village on the edge of the island. So it just, I think you can hand wave that one, but I get what he's saying. It needed to be 70 years though, because it just, I mean, 70 years later sounds really cool, right, everybody? I mean, oh, 70 years. But anyways, um, a few other smaller complaints. Characters are rendered unconscious pretty much every chapter. Not really, but yeah, okay. No more knockouts in book two. Uh, the Torchwings are neat, but essentially just fairies. No, they're not. Fairies don't grow forests and all the different cool things that the Torchwings do. Torchwings like make new creatures and they grow forests in instants and they make houses that are glass from bark of trees and they're way cooler than fairies, dude. Fairies are lame. But anyways, uh, a lot of the problems, conflicts between the main characters would disappear if they just talked to each other. There's only one like that, which is Mamie and her sister thing. There are scenes which are just pages on pages of exposition about something that happened in myth or hundreds of years ago. That happens a couple times, yeah, but it's like, man, if I did a flashback every time I had to do that, the book would be just flashbacks, and then you'd be like, oh, there's so many flashbacks. But Sean and Mamie form a weirdly strong bond after knowing each other for about a day. Yeah, I know, like, I've always felt like Manny and Sean feel more like friends in book one than the lovers that I present them as, you know? So, like, there's a criticism that's not even in here. See? I'm criticizing my own book now. Sean and Manny, I wish I had done a better job or put more time into making them seem like they actually give a shit about each other or like each other. They clearly give a shit about each other, but it's like, why? They don't even really like each other that much, it seems like, but they do. It just, I didn't put that many scenes in, or a couple got cut, you know. And there's still the one where they lie beneath the tree, which is a pretty good one. Um, so after all that negativity, done in large part to serve as a critique for J.M. Arlen, hopes that I've given enough room to improve. Why still 5 stars? Or 4 stars? Well, some of that is generosity, it must be said, but also it's because I enjoyed reading it. So even with his flaws, he enjoyed reading it. Yeah. The individual adventures were exciting, the action fun, the banter sometimes quite clever, the plot was enjoyable to keep up with, and the world has some fascinating ideas, and the prose is pretty excellent, or at least not dull. Haha, Brandon Sanderson, nah nah nah. There's a lot to like here, and I really look forward to J.M. Arlen's next book, should one ever be written. Yeah. There's enough here to like that I want this author and even this very flawed story to do well. And I think it is worth the read because of the positives alone. Yeah, suck on that, Reddit. The negatives may be numerous, but this book is better than any other book I've read in years that had less than 5 reviews. At the time of writing, it has 1 on Amazon, 0 on Goodreads. Yeah, that would be soon to change. And I read quite a lot of those. I'll conclude this absurdly lengthy review by saying to the author, keep it up. I will be on the lookout for your next book, and I'm confident that it will improve in every way off this one. Okay, well, Dylan, guess what, buddy? You're right, okay? Because your review is the one I look at more than anybody's, because I know that you're being genuine because you enjoyed parts of the book that I did. So let this be a lesson to you, people of Reddit, and angry people on YouTube who don't have real hair. You people need to give me more credit for the things I've done right, because it's not fair that my book gets trashed so much online when there is definitely something good to be found in there. And I'm not just saying that because I want you to buy the book. I'm saying that because I love this freaking story, and I want other people that might like this story to like it too, so that we can all together enjoy it, you know? Like how people all together really loved Lord of the Rings back in the day. I loved Lord of the Rings, those movies. It was like, to me, one of the coolest times of my life was those movies coming out in theaters as a little kid. It felt like I was on that journey with Frodo, and I wanted to repeat that feeling for other people. You know, I wanted to make the next great adventure story that people could go on. And, you know, it's not as good as Lord of the Rings. No freaking way. Lord of the Rings is incredible. It's the best story ever told. Tolkien is a genius. He's like the coolest guy who ever lived. He basically sacrificed his entire life to making that story for the world. And I will never stop respecting him for that. Man is a true freaking gangster. And yeah, The Crystal Keepers is not nearly as good as that, but it is pretty good at what it tried to do. So there you go, Reddit. My response to criticism.